Income taxes in Arkansas. Almost everyone will pay less, but will equity and investment suffer? It's one of the most polarizing issues of the past half century, and again, a conservative legislature speaks. It's a program demanded in all 75 counties, and it's moving closer to completion. But how much help and when from Washington? Arkansas Week coming up.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Arkansas Week. The Arkansas General Assembly still hard at it, and we'll get to some state issues in just a moment. But first, an update from the national legislature. United States Representative French Hill, Republican of the 2nd District, is our guest. Congressman, thanks very much for coming in.
Steve, thanks for the invitation.
Well, we have the General Assembly, as noted, working and making progress on the Hutchinson administration's highway program. But it was broadly noted that in State of the Union and in congressional committees, there really hasn't been much said, done, or action on federal assistance on infrastructure, which all of the states demand.
Right.
Why?
Well, I think the Transportation Committee has really struggled to find a way to add money that the president talked about when he was first sworn in. He wanted to add in $200 billion of spending over 2 years for public-private partnerships and infrastructure. He never really submitted a detailed plan on how to do that in the committees, a detailed plan on how to pay for it. So that's an issue. We have a new highway bill we have to reauthorize now for 2020 that's coming up, and that'll be the principal focus of the committees. And then I'd say he did approve $21 billion in infrastructure spending in FY19 and FY20, and I really haven't seen how that's been proposed to be spent, even though the Congress approved that money in the last appropriations process. And the final thing I'd say about infrastructure, the administration also owed us a proposal about how to reduce the regulatory cost of doing infrastructure. How do we streamline it so that mayors can pave more miles of road, county judges, at a lower cost? So all that is still, I think, we're waiting on the Trump administration for a concrete proposal. And so we're in our second year of waiting.
Well, it's got other issues that it's concerned about, as we know. One of them is the emergency declaration. There is stiff resistance, some of it even from members of your own caucus. What are your thoughts, sir? Are you prepared to support it?
Well, I am studying it now because I have concerns about executive action using reprogramming of money unless it falls within a few important categories. I don't think the president has set a precedent because the 1976 law on emergency declarations and reprogramming funds is very clear in that statute. It's been used 60 times. 31 of them are still in place. So that's not the part that concerns me. What concerns me is the reprogramming of the money from DOD, Milcon, VA. What is the unintended consequences of that? What projects are not going to get built in money appropriated by Congress in military VA?
It's about half the pool, isn't it? Or 40,
right,
45%.
It is. And so I want to know what is not going to be done before I decide where I stand on the particulars of this declaration. So number one, I'm studying it. Number two, I want to know the unintended consequences of moving this money around, including even the $600 million in drug forfeiture funds. What was that money normally supporting? So those are the kinds of questions that I have as we go into next week.
If I may say so, it sounds like pretty profound reservations, but are they just narrowly focused on, for example, the 2nd District? Or a broader issue?
No, that's a broader issue. Look, I think that there's also this issue of scale, Steve, which is the size of the reprogramming. For instance, President Obama used a interpretation of expanding DACA for our dreamers and said, well, President Bush had done that back in the early 1990s. True, but President Bush had just touched a few thousand people instead of millions of people. So there's a scale issue in the reprogramming that I want to look at too. for the areas where the president wants to use the emergency declaration to reprogram the money.
Emergency declarations, correct, per se, are not unprecedented, but critics of this one say that this one really is, in the sense that he's declaring a national emergency, a crisis situation. I think it's a term that you've used where even the Joint Chiefs do not seem to concur.
Well, President Obama's used this natural emergency legislation at the border. President Bush 43 has at the border. We've used it in other methods. So I don't think that in and of itself is precedent setting. What concerns me is the unintended consequences of money that Congress has appropriated being reprogrammed for another use, and that's the heart of what I want to study about.
And that is the constitutional issue, is it not?
Well, it is. I think
George will. I think really it would just shred the Constitution.
Well, I don't think it shreds the Constitution. I think the hyperbole around that it's unconstitutional is a little much. I think the Congress passed a law in 1976 with particular direction to let a president reprogram funds for a legitimate national emergency purpose, and that's why I think we have to study that and keep it sort of balanced in the criticism of it. But Congress, the reason why I don't like them generally, I didn't like President Obama's view of expanding DACA. I think that should be Congress's job to do that, and Congress has appropriated for almost 30 years now, fencing along the southwest border. We've built 600 miles of border barrier, and we just authorized building 55 more miles in the Rio Grande Valley. So my preference in all these things is that Congress do the work, Congress reach consensus, and Congress decide how best to spend the taxpayers' hard-earned funds.
To close out that issue, do we list the gentleman from the 2nd District as leaning no?
I'm in a study mode on it, and I'm a lean no about the reprogramming of the funds, but I'm going to finish my due diligence.
You have there's another deadline coming up, and that's the debt vote is March 1st, isn't it?
The debt ceiling is coming up, but I suspect that the Treasury will use extraordinary measures and that vote will be postponed until August and September.
Do you see another shutdown on the horizon?
I don't at this time. I think both the leadership teams, Pelosi's leadership team, Schumer's leadership team, have been burned by this. Last year with the Schumer shutdown in February of 2017 over DACA. Schumer should have taken that deal, by the way.
Well, he would say the administration should have taken
Well, I
the
think
deal.
the president should have too. Yeah, I do. I think that was probably a deal that would have preempted some of the conversations we just had in December and January. So right now I don't anticipate that. I think both sides understand that shutdowns are not a way to run the government.
Abroad, you've expressed real concern about the administration's plan to greatly reduce. It seems to fluctuate on an almost daily basis.
Yeah.
The size of the administration's commitment in terms of manpower, personnel, logistics in Syria. Now as of Friday morning, the indications are he's going to leave. Basically, it hardly amounts to a skeleton force, about 200 military personnel.
You're right. As news broke this morning, as we tape this, he's proposing to leave 200 person was the number I heard, but I've also heard a number slightly higher than that in Syria in key locations in northeast Syria along the Turkish border in the Kurd area, and then very importantly at Al Tanf, which is on the road between Damascus and Baghdad. This is a critical point for both humanitarian issues as it relates to Jordan. There's some 50,000 refugees trapped in our 30-mile exclusion zone at Al Tanf, and it's very important that the U.S. or a U.S. ally maintain a military force there, not only for the humanitarian purposes of it, but also to prevent Iran from having a free land bridge from Baghdad to Damascus along the main highway through the desert. So I was pleased to hear this morning that the president's agreed to leave strategic forces in a couple of key spots in Syria. I think that's smart. I don't think we should have pulled completely out of Syria as was announced in January, and I'm pleased that he's reconsidered that position.
200 personnel, though, that basically a mess tent crew in terms of brigade or battalion size.
You underestimate the...
Well, no, and I'm sure they're highly trained combat personnel. I don't mean to diminish their MOS at all.
This is a key spot, key geography, key humanitarian mission, and our base at Al Tanf in that exclusion zone has been staffed with about 200 personnel for the past several months. So that's not a new number at Al Tanf. And so that's why if that number is maintained at the Al Tanf area, and we have a small strategic force in northeast Syria along the Kurd-Turkish situation, I think that'd be very helpful.
You were in the employ. You served a great Republican internationalist, Bush 1, in the White House in his administration. This administration, if there is a singular or single theme that seems to encapsulate its foreign policy, it's a nationalistic pulling out. He speaks ill of NATO or grudgingly of NATO. There's the IMF treaty that he's pulling out of, the Iran thing. What do you make of this foreign policy? First of all, do you approve of it? What are your concerns about it?
I don't approve of a lot of his tactics. Now, let's take NATO just to pick one of many topics you could discuss. NATO Article 5, the commitment of America to the transatlantic partnership. The House just passed a resolution overwhelmingly in support of America's support of NATO and the transatlantic partnership. The President is in support of that transatlantic partnership. He simply has made a couple of key points that I do agree with. One, the 28 countries should hit the targets set during the George W. Bush administration and Obama administration for their percentage of GDP dedicated to defense and procurement. And only 6 or 7 did. That number is now moving up due to President Trump saying, let's honor the commitments we made to each other. So that's a point he's made. Secondly, he thinks that Europe should be more energy independent of both the Middle East and of Russia, to give the Central European countries, including Germany, more options in the case of being blackmailed by the Russians. And so he's encouraged American LNG and petroleum to be exported to the EU. These are good strategic issues of a strong transatlantic partnership. But President Trump is from Queens. He's a tough-talking real estate developer, and he does not use diplomatic language. But I believe, based on watching him at work, that he's supportive of the NATO arrangement and the transatlantic partnership.
To put it bluntly, does he know what he's doing in foreign affairs?
I think he listens to a good set of advisors, and I think he starts with a premise of, you tell me this has been an issue and it's been this way for 25 or 30 years. What's America doing to change and move in a direction that is good for the United States and good for the ultimate outcome of the world trading system or the world defense system? It's just a different way of going about it, and it is breaking a lot of china in the store as he goes about that process.
Will Congress have to? Where's the glue?
Well, I fully believe on trade, on the transatlantic partnership, on trade in Asia, on consultation with a direction for China. President Trump would be better off if he planned and worked with Congress on these priorities, and so that we are part of that consultative system. And I would say in the 2 years he's been president, he's been inconsistent on that. He's done it on regulatory policy. He's done it on tax policy. He's done it on some aspects of trade policy as it relates to redoing NAFTA. But he has not done that in terms of the approach to China or the EU, and in some cases in our military arrangements. He is better off and gets, I think, better advice and direction if he consults with Congress.
Have to end it there, Congressman, because we're out of time. Thank you for your time. Always a pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Come back.
We'll do it.
And we'll be right back. Back now, and our second half devoted to events in the Arkansas Capitol. With us, Senator Keith Ingram, Democrat of West Memphis, and Senator Jason Rapert, Republican of Conway. Gentlemen, thanks very much for being with us. We are at, we would appear to be anyway, certainly from the Hutchinson administration's viewpoint, to be on the kind of the downhill side. I don't want to minimize whatever obstacles may remain in the governor's path. But Senator, he's gotten pretty much everything he's asked for so far, and the highway program bill seems to be almost in the bag.
Well, certainly we passed it out of the Senate yesterday. It had more sponsors that it needed to pass. Yes, I think the governor's having a great session. and we lack transformation, which I've got a couple of binders I've been reading of transformation, and Price Show Dog couldn't jump over these binders. They're so high, a couple of thousand pages. But all in all, I think the governor has presented his program, and it's been met with a good reception by the legislature.
Looking from the south side of the Capitol, Senator Raper, to the north end, do you see much of a problem over there?
You know, I hope not. You know, I think there's broad support even coming into the session on some of the major issues that we need to deal with. And you know, the governor is having a good session, but he's also having a good term as governor. He's had it come out of a very strong first 4 years, headed into this last stretch for him. I will say that I'm hearing a little bit, Senator Ingram was right, we passed it overwhelmingly in the Senate yesterday on the highway bill. I definitely support that. Everybody needs good roads to have good development. But I have heard, I'm wondering about the half cent.
You're talking about the wholesale tax.
I'm talking about the wholesale tax. Talk about that portion that we're passing in the legislature, which has the funding that will come from the 3 cent, the 6 cents on the diesel and gasoline, which has the casino funding coming into this program as well. And we also need to remember this, not just a state highway program. What we did yesterday also affects the cities and the counties. They get a portion of what's going to be coming. But I am concerned and ready to hear what the House is going to do with the half cent that will be referred to the people. In my opinion, if they don't pass that and we don't get that full package out there, it's problematic. So I'm very hopeful that next week, early into the session next week, that we'll see the House make a decision on this. I don't think it's going to be a problem, but when we get to this point in the session, people begin to try to do a little horse trading, and that always happens. But I believe in the end, with super majorities here in the Arkansas legislature, that we're going to get behind them. It's a historic highway funding package, the largest that we've ever seen in history. When you look back at even 2012, it's even larger than that strategy that they passed then. I was in the legislature, so was Senator Ingram. But I think we're going to get this done. Listen, the Chambers of Commerce, the Trucking Association, those that are involved in business, they know we've got to have a road funding package. So I believe it's going to come through.
As I think Mr. Ingram's father was in the Arkansas Senate when Dale Bumpers attempted the last huge whole-scale reorganization of the executive branch government. As a governor who's getting pretty much what he wanted, how do you see that playing out, Senator? Do you see any snags, really obstacles on that?
I don't. You know, there's been a day or two here along in the session where we found out that some issue needs to be tweaked in some of those bills. It's a massive reorganization, really. And for instance, the Commerce Department that we're talking about, you know, you're going to have securities and the Insurance Department all underneath this Commerce Secretary. Making sure that that works smoothly, because frankly the Securities Commissioner and the Insurance Commissioner has positions around the nation interacting with their cohorts on regulation, and so making sure that that all runs smoothly, I think it's going to be just fine. And look, 42 to 15, which has not been done since Senator Bumpers, I think it's a good thing for the state of Arkansas and helps the governor. It won't only help Governor Hutchinson, but it will help those that come after him to be able to more nimbly take care of the reins of government and make decisions and have people be accountable. So I think it's a good thing overall, and I think it's going to pass.
And the General Assembly finished legislative action this past week, and the governor signed into law the tax reduction bill. You, Senator Ingram, have expressed some real reservations about whether A, we're eating seed corn in terms of general revenues, and two, the equity argument that much of the last tax cuts went to the more affluent taxpayers, and then because of the highway program, we raised motor fuels taxes.
I think the concern, on one hand,
or are likely to.
You know, I think it's $97 million tax cut is better than the original $192 million, and that gave a lot of people a real pause because what we've seen happen in surrounding states. On the dynamic scoring that the tax task force had a firm come in and do, that $192 million tax cut was a $188 million dead loser to the state of Arkansas. It only had a $4 million positive impact. But I think, you know, all in all, I think the optics were bad for the governor on that. I think something that could have gone along with it with EITC to help offset some of that. That being said, the highway program is a major accomplishment if we can get this through. It looks like that that would be the third amendment, the joint amendment that would be agreed upon by the House and Senate to go on the ballot. I think the thing that we have to be very careful with is, as Senator Rayford said, the horse trading. I already hear, you know, some of the legislators trying to put some more controls on the highway department in order to pass this legislation. And as we know, it's a constitutionally independent agency. And the numbers for the highway program, legislative audit has backed those numbers up as accurate. And so we've heard a little rumbling about disputes about some of the things. Yeah, and so we'll sort of see how it plays off, but we have to view this as something good for our state overall.
Do you see a stumbling block, Mr. Rayford, in terms of oversight over the commission?
I don't see that. Now, obviously, we do want to have proper oversight that's there, and yes, they're constitutionally separated, and I think that's good. We don't want to get into, we don't want to even more politicize that entity. And so what I do appreciate is, and hope that they will do, is show the willingness to speak with the legislature and hear concerns when they're put out there. I think some of that fair dealing will do away with some of the bills. And so sometimes it's just a message. I do want to say that I think the optics are great. Governor Hutchinson came in and he promised that he was going to cut taxes. And we have literally been a part of the largest tax cuts in Arkansas history. And we've been able to take care of our budget along the way. We've utilized the RSA, we've had balanced budgets, and so we're now just finishing this. We had a lower income tax cut, we had middle class, and yes, we are rewarding people that make business go in Arkansas. So I'm glad that we see a tax cut that's affected everyone. And I want to say for those that are in my conservative counterparts in the House as they're dealing with these issues, since I've been in the legislature, they sent a report to me the other day. I have voted for and either sponsored or co-sponsored over $500 million in income tax and sales tax cuts since I've been in the legislature. And so I made the statement in our committee, as it relates to highways, I'm a citizen here. I like to have an emergency vehicle have a good road to get to my grandmother when she needs to have attention. I like to have good roads so that people's business and commerce can happen, so farmers can get their products to market. And so that means that there are times when we decide what we're going to spend our money on. And so net for me, yes, we've got a few increases on the user fees, which are the sales taxes on gasoline and diesel. But overall, Republicans have promised tax cuts. Republicans have delivered tax cuts, and Asa Hutchinson is fulfilling his promise. So I do say I think the optics look very good from my point.
The optics are one thing, though, but the investment option, though, Senator, is the one that you take issue with.
Yeah, I keep saying that. I do not want our constituents to think that government's fully funded, that we have needs. We have rural fire departments that have needs. Something that Senator Rayford and I have worked on, the developmentally disabled. We still have a long waiting list. Pre-K needs, it's a proven winner. It makes a difference in our education of our children. We have needs that are out there. We're sponsoring a bill now, Senator Hendren and I, to try to raise the salaries of the state police to get them at least competitive with surrounding states. So it's a fine line to try to provide the proper tax cuts, but also we've got to remember the investment that we make in our state, and we can't neglect that at the expense of tax cuts to the wealthy.
Enormously polarizing issue, and that is abortion. And you two gentlemen have differed over legislation in this particular session. But Senator, it would seem to, the outcome of the vote so far would seem to underscore the very profound conservative ethic that seems to be prevalent in Arkansas today.
Well, I think it underscores the fact that Arkansas people value life. And we are seeing, and we won't have time in this session today to go in depth into it, but I did an interview yesterday with CBS. And we see that states are preparing for the possibility that there could be a decision on Roe v. Wade that could return the authority of the states to regulate or prohibit abortion. And so the New York situation and Virginia, where they have fully expanded, and I even spoke with a legislator from Vermont yesterday, they have literally expanded abortion right up until birth in their states. Why are they doing that? Because they see that Roe may very well be overturned. And what we're saying with SB 149, the Human Life Protection Act, is that we value life. And Amendment 68 in the Constitution in Arkansas says that we believe life begins at conception and abortion funds will not be spent on any situation except to save the life of the mother. And what we did in SB 149 is we fully implemented, and were advised by the writers of that amendment, that we needed empowering language. The bottom line is that if you value life, you value that life from beginning to end. And Arkansas has embraced the pro-life movement with many different initiatives that we've passed. Obviously, 75%, and I want to brag on, there were 3 very courageous Democrat senators that voted with all of the Republicans to pass this. We had 29 out of 35, and they stood up and they voted for SB 149, and you had Democrats vote for it also in the House. And I'll say to my colleague here, I understand people represent different areas, have different issues. This is not an issue that I feel we need to argue about. This is an issue to say if we protect animals and have animal abuse laws that protect little puppies and little kittens, surely we have the ability to protect the lives of human babies.
Senator, I'll let you close it out because we're about out of time.
The one thing I know about life that I've learned is everybody's situation is different and personal.
We have to end it there because we're simply out of time. We'll come back and discuss it more at a later time. Please come back. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having us.
That's our program for this week. See you next week. Hold on a second.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.